Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel for this Sunday, January 12th, 2025. We're going to go out into the desert and into the mountains and some national parks and all sorts of really cool places tonight. And Cheryl is going to tell us how to take pictures of them so we can take them home and put them on our walls. And she's been doing this for 3 or 4 years now. She's been doing a great job of it. I've known her for quite some time, and she's quite active in the Riverside Astronomical Society. I think her second slide has something to some of her background, so I won't go too far into that. Now, we've got some other things coming up. Alan's coming up. Alan Friedman's going to come up, and he's going to tell us about some solar imaging. And Alan, would you like to tell us a little bit about some of that right now? What are you going to be doing next week?
Sure. Well, I'm going to do a presentation of the work the way that I do it, which may not be the way that you will want to do it, but I will give a nice overview of how to both begin observing and imaging the sun. And then after we explore some of that, we'll dive into some hands-on image processing. And I'll share some of the techniques that I've developed for making images of the sun, which were kind of controversial at one point in time and now seem to be embraced by the solar community pretty openly. So that's kind of what we'll do. It'll be casual, informal, and fast-paced, and lots of room for questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen right now, Alan, and everybody else out there in the Astro Imaging channel land. And let me see. I think that's it. Have I shown it properly? Yeah, that looks good. Here it comes. Yeah. Tonight we got Cheryl, and I said Alan's coming in next week. And then we've got Dustin and Jonathan, and you can tell that we've got some pretty interesting things coming up. Remember, we're going to take the Super Bowl off because, you know, it's the Super Bowl and people all over the world want to know about the Super Bowl. So we won't have a show. We'll be watching the Super Bowl. We show you this every week or so that you can first off see what we're going to be doing in the next little while. But there's a second reason. You see these opens? We have to fill those opens somehow. We want you to know that we've got some opens coming up. And we need you to tell us about some of the experiments you're running in astro imaging, some of the things you do, show off some of your work. Now, if you can put together a PowerPoint and you've done some interesting things, you can do this. It's not all that difficult to do. And so we encourage you to go ahead and come on over to our contact sheet over here at the home part, way down there at the bottom. And you can contact us in various ways and offer your services, okay? So you go ahead and do that, and we should enjoy ourselves. Now, today, we've already got people saying hello, saying hi, and you can see we've got the comment section open over here. If you have any questions for Cheryl about what she's doing, you want her to explain anything else, be sure to type something in over here, and we'll try to answer it as well as we can. Hey, wake up. Anyway, that's it for my introduction. So it's about time for Cheryl to come on in. So I'm going to stop sharing, stop presenting. Cheryl, it's your turn. Go ahead.
All right.
Start your sharing.
Yeah, looks like I'm seeing it here on my end. So welcome everybody.
You look good. Yeah, you look good.
All right. So a little bit about me, if I can get it to advance. There we go, and start my timer. There we go. I am a longtime member of the Riverside Astronomical Society, and the club actually that Alex is in, and known him for quite a long time. Done a bunch of jobs in there. Currently, I'm their chief observer. So, for example, at our meeting last night, I gave a talk about what are some interesting things to see in the night sky and focused on a couple of objects. I am a middle school science teacher, retired in 2021, so 33 years under the belt, and really became interested in nightscape photography starting in that summer and really got interested once the Milky Way core came up in 2022. So I'm going to share with you some information, basics on how can you get your Milky Way photo shoots going, how can you take the photos that you need once you're out there in the field, and then what are some tips, if we have time at the end, on how to edit them. So you're going to need a camera. A modern DSLR or mirrorless camera would be helpful, but just as a reminder, you don't need to go out and buy something new. The best camera you have is great. I started with a very basic Nikon camera and then eventually upgraded a bit, but the camera you have might do the job. It could be a micro four thirds, it could be a crop sensor, APS-C, or a full frame sensor, mirrorless or not. The key thing really though is if you can go to ISO 3200 or better, that's going to do pretty well for you for Milky Way photography. A couple things that are nice to have is if your camera has live view, it's going to make your life so much easier when you go to focus on stars. Having an L bracket or something like the Silence-ATLAS, get my laser pointer here, this little cool bracket that rotates your camera, or the L bracket here on the top of your tripod to orient your view is very helpful. And articulating or tilting screens on your LCD. If you are like me, I'm fairly tall. And if I have my camera and I'm pointing at something really high, because I don't just do Milky Way photography, I also do some astro imaging through telescopes or a longer lens. And if you're pointed really high, that's hard to see your screen. So having an articulating screen or tilting screen is real helpful, but not mandatory. So some equipment ideas. These are some lenses that I have used. Very common in the Milky Way world is using a Rokinon or Samyang 14 millimeter at f2.8 generally. If you're going to use a zoom, the Tachina works really nice. I think this one now is not any longer in production, so you'd have to buy a used one. And a favorite is the Nikon Z series, that 20 millimeter lens. I know quite a few Milky Way photographers that use that lens. You're going to need to have a tripod. Sturdy is going to be better. Lightweight could be better too. So you can have sturdy and cheap. It's going to be kind of heavy with the aluminum legs to it. It could be sturdy and light. A bit more on the expensive side with carbon fiber legs, but you really don't want to do cheap and light. That's not going to do you too well. So be willing, if this is something you're going to enjoy doing, you might want to consider saving up to get a nice tripod. You also want to consider the load capacity of your tripod and make sure it can handle your gear adequately. Another consideration is how large or small you can get the heights on your gear. If you're going to be photographing laying down on the ground, shooting up and getting a foreground for your Milky Way, having a tripod that can handle that would be great. Now, I'm in my 60s now. I don't get on the ground too much. I usually do most of my photography at standing height. And for me, I have a tripod that's very comfortable for that height. The number of leg sections might be of consideration. The more you have, the wobblier your tripod could be. And you might want to think about the folded length too, because if you're going to travel with it, how easy is it going to be to carry around? Or if you're going to travel and it requires you to get on a plane, are you going to be able to get it in your bag? A couple other things to consider would be a tripod. For the head, for the tripod, excuse me. You can use a three-way head, which is okay. I personally prefer a ball head, and the one that I use is photographed there, the Benro. Ball heads will give a greater range of motion, but you do want to make sure you have a friction control knob as part of that. I do have a couple friends that shoot with a geared head, and they like it, but to me, you just can't tilt your camera back quite as far, so I prefer a ball head. But again, make sure it's able to carry the capacity of your camera and your lens. Other things that will be helpful is some sort of remote trigger. Some cameras you can use an inexpensive little trigger like the top picture here. Problem with that is you're going to have to reach around to the front of your camera to get it to fire off, and sometimes that's a little bit of feat in itself. Having a wired remote is nice. It's just going to shoot from whatever you have for your camera setting. But if you want to do something a little bit more advanced, I do like the intervalometer. There is a bit of a learning curve to it, but once you handle how to use it and how to set it up, that's what I use. And it can be wired like this one, or it could be a Wi-Fi wireless like that. Having a lens heater is also going to be helpful if you live near water or you're in some place that gets a lot of fog or dew. A dew heater is going to be helpful, and you can get those large enough to go onto your camera lenses. You need a power bank to power it up, and having that around to charge your phone if it happens to be low, or to recharge headlamps is kind of beneficial too. Having a headlamp is also great. You want to try to get to the point where you don't need to have a headlamp when you're messing with your gear out in the field, but a red light is going to be helpful to save your night vision, just like it is in any aspect of astronomy. And having a white flashlight, either to do some light painting or at least for hiking in and out. For me personally, the red headlamp doesn't give you a lot of depth of field when you're trying to hike in or out of places, and I'm clumsy. I've actually stumbled a few times and had a fall. So having white light going into or out of your area, for me at least, it's very helpful. Having a first aid kit is also a good idea. A few Band-Aids or something in your kit, having something bigger in the car. If you live in bear country, be prepared with some bear spray. A couple of photographers I know have coyotes that are a big problem, so they have an air horn actually to scare those guys off. If you don't want to be lunched to some mosquitoes, maybe have either bug gear or some sort of spray. And a hand or foot warmer. Those portable, one-shot use ones are very handy to keep your feet and hands warm. But better yet, if you forgot your lens dew heater, there you go. You can construct something, MacGyver it, to keep your lens from condensating. So you need to know your gear. You're going to be shooting in manual mode and manual focus. So you need to know how to turn those onto that on your camera and your lens. You need to know how to change your shutter speed and your aperture as well. One of the settings we tend to use most often is changing our ISO multiple times during our photo shoot. So you need to kind of get some muscle memory on where those buttons are and what do you need to do to change things. When you're out in the field, it's dark. Your LCD screen is a source of light. So you're going to need to get a good idea of what your exposures really are looking like on your live view screen. So use your histogram, know how to find that in your camera menu system and access that from time to time, especially if you change any settings. And turning on exposure preview in Nikon or simulator, I think it's called in Canon, gives you a pretty good representation of your current exposure to help you focus on the stars. You want to make yourself a checklist. Everything you need to have in your tripod, your bag, because I have a separate bag for my tripod, everything that's in your camera bag, everything that needs to go in the car, everything that's in your cold gear kit to make sure you stay toasty when you're out in the dark at night. Make sure you have a checklist so you don't forget anything. Trust me, I know what I speak of on that one. Practice in the dark ahead of time before you go out. Maybe on a moonless light, go set up in the backyard. Find a room that doesn't have too many windows, turn off all the lights, set up your gear, practice finding all those settings in the dark. You'll be very happy when you go out on site and find out you know how to use your camera well. So when you're going to go do a Milky Way shoot, you need to plan. And my masterclass instructor always shares this quote by Stephen R. Covey, to begin with the end in mind. And to successfully create that image you were really looking for, you kind of need to think ahead of what are all the things you want your finished image to look like. Do you want just a silhouette for your foreground with the Milky Way prominent in the image? Do you want it lit? If you're going to lit your foreground, your light foreground, how are you going to do it? Are you going to capture that during blue hour? Are you going to allow a little bit of moonlight help? Is it going to be starlit? Are you going to bring something with you to artificially light it? So you have to kind of think in advance. Are you going to capture what you want in just a single frame? Or are you going to do something where you want the Milky Way arch? Well, you're going to need to have some gear to help you get that full arch with multiple pictures that are overlapping so then you can post-process them. Are you going to do this in a single frame? Are you going to stack several frames to reduce noise? Do you have access to a star tracker? That will bring out a lot of color in your images as well, in your stars. So really think, how are you going to edit this? What's the gear you need? What shots do you need to get ahead of time? We have tons of planning apps to help you with that. So you want things that are going to help you know what's the forecast like? What's the moon setting phase going to be? Is the moonlight going to impact your scene at all? Is it okay if it's up for a little bit to capture your foreground? You want to know how light polluted it's going to be where you shoot from, particularly if it's somewhere you've never been before. Is the Milky Way core even going to be visible? And if it is, when? And what orientation is it? Is it horizontal? Is it more diagonal in your shot, or is it going to be more vertical? So lots of things to consider, as well as, does my foreground line up with the Milky Way core, and what time of year does it? You also want to look at, when is true dark? We're going to want to be over here when it is nighttime. We don't want any light in the sky to compromise our Milky Way. So you need to know when astronomical twilight is, and there's a lot of apps and things that can show you when astronomical twilight is ending, or if you're shooting in the early morning hours, when it's going to begin, because your sky is going to start to get blue, and we don't want that. You want a dark sky to take your Milky Way. So planning around the moon phases, getting that quality image. You basically want to plan around a new moon if possible, and 3 days before to 3 days after are ideal. The other opposite end is true. During a full moon, 3 days before it and 3 days after it generally aren't a good time for photographing the Milky Way, but depending on where the Milky Way is, when it's rising during the Milky Way season, which is generally February through about October, you can get away with third quarter sometimes as well. So planning, coming back from the eclipse, we ended up in Arkansas for that, and I live in Southern California, so quite a long drive. We ended up looking at, well, what's along the way that we could go take a look at. So my husband's very helpful and supportive of my Milky Way photography habit. So Devil's Tower was an option, and forecast looked to be clear, minimal clouds at night, so that's where we headed. So I did my homework before we left Arkansas, and as we were getting there, we had a nice little bit of moon. So as I got set up, I got a little bit of illumination from the moon lighting up Devil's Tower. And then about an hour and a half later, it was completely dark, and I was well into my imaging at that point. And then we had that nice Milky Way core. Unfortunately, got some pexy clouds coming through, but you know, I was there one night, and you get what you get sometimes. Here we go. So knowing the light pollution of your area is also nice. If you're in a Bora 1 or 2, I'm jealous. Awesome night skies, not only for Milky Way photography, of course, but any astro imaging. I have access more to Bortle 3 and 4s if I travel an hour and 15 minutes or so from my home. It's possible in a Bortle 5, but you're not going to get great results. So if you're in a Bortle 5 or higher, maybe try shooting towards an area that's darker sky. Maybe you'll get something, but you really want to shoot for Bortle 1 through 4 if at all possible. All right, so I thought I'd just share, this is the Serpent out in Borrego Springs, California. I've been a couple times. So I'm standing here. This is a Bortle Class 3, just north of the town of Borrego Springs. I'm shooting kind of east-southeast at this point. This is in May. And I got a Bortle 4. So it's amazing how much light pollution you get in your skies. So you want to watch how your sky lines up with cities that are in the distance too. Sometimes you can't do anything about it, and you try to alleviate that a little bit in your post-processing. Another example, last year in February, we were out in Death Valley up at Zabriskie Point, looking towards a Bortle 6 in Visalia. But the nice thing about it was it's so far away, it really didn't impact the shot too. You got some light pollution along the edge here over Telescope Peak and so, but it doesn't really detract from the image. So really paying attention to what direction are you shooting into is helpful. When you're planning, you want to start this off-site. You can check your Milky Way to see, is it going to be up during the time that you have available, and what's its orientation going to be using stellarium. There's apps that do come for a fee. The one here on the left is called Photo Pills. I like to use this one in advance just to see, is my object going to line up with where I'm going to stand? So I have it set here at Joyner Trailhead out by Devil's Tower. The bigger dots mean that the Milky Way core is going to be visible above the horizon. And it shows me, oh yeah, okay, it's going to be lining up with Devil's Tower, so I should be able to get that shot. These two are from an app called Planet Pro. Again, like Photo Pills, it has a plan mode, and your bigger green dots, that's your Milky Way core. You want to point your camera in that general direction, and yes, I could get the Milky Way core to the right of Devil's Tower, which is what I was looking for. What's nice about this app is not even being on site, you can get an approximation of what it's going to look like. So I would be using a 20mm lens in landscape mode, and there's my Milky Way right there. And it gives you some nice information in the app as well. When I get on site, then I end up using Photo Pills again, if it's during the daytime, to do a little scouting to finalize my composition. So again, when you're planning off-site, you can use the light pollution map, which is what this is. This was where I was standing for that shot from Devil's Tower. There's Devil's Tower. And Devil's Tower has a little town, is a Bortle 4 called Sundance, and we stayed up here in Hewlett. So not too much light pollution in the direction that I was shooting. So once we got on site, I took some images. Now my color cast is off because I use an Astro camera, so everything has a purplish tinge. But then I got my Photo Pills app out just to confirm where Milky Way would be around the time that my husband and I would be coming back to the location after grabbing a nap. And yep, that's what it was going to do. That's what I was looking for. So here's my final image. I took that moonlight shot that I showed earlier, and then I took a stack of images for the sky about an hour and a half later and blended that all together. So this is what's known as a nightscape shot. The Milky Way is nice, but when you can tie it to something on the Earth and has a little bit of story behind it, perhaps, it's very compelling. I always loved Devil's Tower, back from Close Encounters fame when I first learned about it. So here's a Photo Pills lineup during the day out in Borrego Springs. Oops. And there it is in the evening. So it lined up quite nicely for where I was thinking I needed to stand. This was in Acadia National Park. I had seen somebody do an image from this staircase 3 summers ago, and I knew I was going to be there in Maine. So I definitely wanted to try to recreate this shot, and it looked like, even though it was in September towards the end of the Milky Way core season, I'd be able to get it. And this was early on in my editing. I'm looking forward to going back and trying this a little bit again, but I focused for the bottom of the top of the stairs, the bottom of the stairs, the beach for the foreground, and blended that in. And then I did a stack for the sky. Well, how do you find the Milky Way core? In the Northern Hemisphere, depends on the season. You're going to look to the southeast during the spring, the south during the summer, and the southwest during the fall. Southern Hemisphere, I've never been, but I've been told that it's to the southeast in the fall and winter time there, and to the southwest in the springtime, but don't quote me on that. That's one of those goals that I'd love to shoot from the Southern Hemisphere sometime. Well, this is one of my very first images that I included a little bit of a landscape. We were helping out at the Grand Canyon Star Party in 2019, and we decided to add a night when I saw how vibrant the Milky Way core was from this Bortle 2 location on the south rim. So we added that extra night. My husband was running a telescope that third night, and I kind of went off to the side and tried a little bit of Milky Way photography. Didn't know what I was doing. I had watched a couple of YouTube videos that afternoon before. Didn't have a great tripod, had a very budget camera with a kit lens, but you know what? It worked. And here's this gorgeous Milky Way with some people pointing out various objects they were showing through their telescopes. Lovely. One of my favorite images with just basic equipment. So how do you find the Milky Way? Well, you have Sagittarius, and the teapot spouts right off into the Milky Way core. We have Scorpius here, and if you can see all of Scorpio and you can see the stinger here, the 2 stars at the end, you know that the core is up. And if you do end up seeing Arcturus coming up above the horizon, you have about an hour before the core is up. So this is a springtime shot, getting up at dark 30 on the other side of Death Valley and the Panamint Mountain Range back in 2022. My first serious image that was a panorama. So the Milky Way at this point is going to be rising early in the morning. You can see that full arch. It's more or less flat or horizontal, and that Milky Way core here is in the southeast, and you can see the wonderful light glow of Las Vegas in the distance. During summertime, the core is going to be a little bit more in diagonal across your sky, and you're going to look more to the direct south from where you're located here in the northern hemisphere at least. The core is going to be coming up before midnight, so it's a little bit nicer time of night to go out and shoot. So there's a couple images that I've taken over the years. And in fall, in the northern hemisphere at least, the core is going to be to your southwest, and it's going to be up when it's dark, so you can get shooting right away. And your Milky Way is going to tend to be more vertical. So I have a couple of shots here from actually 2 states. The left is from Maine, and the right one is from Southern California here in Joshua Tree National Park. There we go. Well, now you know where to find the Milky Way, what type of Milky Way photo we're going to take, because there's basically 6 categories they can be placed in. You can do a single, such as this one. Back in October, I went with my husband and a friend of hers out to the Trona Pinnacles, my second trip out there in 2 years. And all I was interested in actually that night was getting a nice core. I was using a newer lens to me, 28 millimeter. At the time, so I took a bunch of pictures. This is just one single frame from that, and you can see a little bit of light pollution lighting up the pinnacles, but I just wanted a simple Milky Way shot over the pinnacles. I wasn't too worried about doing a foreground shot, because actually that night I had my telescope set up with my ZWO hardware and was imaging, I forget what object, but that was my main thing to do that night, not Milky Way. So you can do a single object. When you get that single frame into Lightroom, you can actually do a double edit if your camera sensor is a little bit better. So this is a double edit that I did out in Mammoth Lakes from a couple of years ago, where you're able to mask off and just do work on the sky, and then mask off and do just some work on the foreground. So that's something you can do just in Lightroom. Another type of Milky Way photo is when you stack the photo. And the reason we do this is to help reduce noise. So this was from a house in Hancock, Maine. We were staying, and we drove out to Acadia National Park the next night. But just shooting some Milky Way over the pretty trees that they had on the property. This is a single. This is a stacked image, and when I zoomed in on the single, you can see quite a bit of noise in the frame. Where stacking that image, I did 15 individual shots taken one right after another, and you can see a lot less noise because you're shooting at a higher ISO. So that's kind of the compromise you have to deal with, is to amplify the light hitting your sensor. You need to use a higher ISO, and that's going to introduce some noise. So stacking can help alleviate that a bit for you. You can also track your images. So this is a tracked image that I did. Again, that was my first visit out at the Trona Pinnacle. So a tracked image. I also did a foreground image, and I didn't do much in the way of processing on these, just to show you that you would take those 2 images and put them together. The problem is when you do your tracked image, your foreground is going to be moving because you're staring at the sky and following the motion of the sky as Earth is spinning. So you're going to get some little edges that are blurry, and when you add your static image of your foreground, you superimpose that over your shot you did of the Milky Way, you're going to have some edges you're going to need to mess around with, and very often you'll clone stamp to remove those little edges. Another type is the Milky Way blend, which is my favorite thing to do. You can stack or track your sky. You could do a single long exposure for your foreground, or you can stack several foreground images together to help reduce noise as well. This one I did a focus stack, so I really love this fireweed on the shore of Lake Hemet in our local mountains. So I did a shot that was focused here. I did another shot that was focused more at the shoreline, and then I did a shot that was more focused for the tree line. And then I did a stack of images for my sky. And again, this was at one of the overlooks in Yosemite. I did basically the same thing, a long exposure for the foreground and a stack for my sky. So that's known as a blend when you pull those two items together. And that you'll need Photoshop or something that maybe you can do that in GIMP as well, a free software. Composites are another thing you can do. If you're going to do a composite and it's not realistic like this one, make sure when you post it, you tell people that. I just knew I had this really nice image I had taken at the Golden State Star Party in Northern California from a couple summers ago with this gorgeous air glow. And I was thinking when we were visiting the monument here, took a night shot, super windy, so I had to end up doing this as a handheld shot. And I had a little tint of green with the presidents. I thought, you know what, that'd be kind of cool to do as a composite. So I added these together, and kind of neat shot, but I did have to share that would never ever happen, because in reality, the presidents would be looking at this part of the sky. So you need to tell people, if you're going to put a composite out there where you take two separate images, in this case taken about a month and a half apart in two different states, tell people that it is a composite. It's more for artistic means, not what they could actually go out and capture. You can do reality composites where, yes, the Milky Way would be there at that time, but let's say you were there during the daytime. And so you're going to do a day to night editing on your foreground. Well, you can see where the Milky Way would have been if you had been able to stay and use maybe a Milky Way shot you do the next day somewhere else. Again, tell people that it's a composite. You can do the most difficult part is a panorama. So this was 22 frames, 10 seconds each at ISO 6400 with a Nikon Z6II. It was Astro modded, and using a software called PT GUI to stitch all these frames together, which helps a lot. There's other things you can use to stitch, but that's what I happen to use. That takes some planning though as well. So if you're going to create a Milky Way image, you need to focus. You need to think of what your composition is going to be in mind, what you're going to use for exposure, and talk about lighting as well. So focusing is our first step. We want to set our camera and lens on manual, like I mentioned before. You also want to shoot in RAW. You want to turn off any vibration reduction or image stabilization. And you can also turn off the long exposure noise reduction, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. You want to set your lens to infinity and then your ISO to its highest value. If you have live view, turn that on, and then point to a bright star and put it in the middle of your frame, or it could be a planet as well. Go ahead and use the magnify button, not on your lens if it happens to be a zoom lens, but use the magnify button on the actual camera body and zoom in as much as you can to your bright star. And then ever so slightly, you're going to rock your focus ring just till those stars get sharp. Once they look sharp, then you're already at a high ISO. You want to do a test shot. 2, maybe 3 seconds should be fine. Take a quick shot and then look at that image on your view screen. Again, zoom in using that button on the back of your camera. Are your stars in focus to the point where you're happy with it? If not, do it again until you get happy. If you're having difficulty as we get older, sometimes that's an issue. Having some sort of hood that goes over your LCD screen that has some magnification to it, or an actual loop, putting that up against your LCD screen is helpful as well. Once you do have that correct focus, though, make sure you change your ISO back to what you typically are going to be using and set your shutter speed back as well. That's helpful. I've forgotten to do that before, and then I go to take an image and why does it look terrible? Oh, it's at high ISO, so I need to change my settings back to normal. So composition, you also want to look at what's your shot going to look at? What foreground? How much are you going to include? Can you include everything? Because here, I didn't know that this had this ugly sign here until I was on site and starting to do some of my Milky Way arch over Skull Rock back in 2022. So I ended up cropping the image. Later the year, the next year in the spring, early spring, I went out with a friend and we went across the street from Skull Rock over here and got a nice Milky Way, but there's these ugly yellow pylons now that they have put across the street. So in my final, I actually cropped that. Can you crop your foreground to get rid of those sorts of things? Or is it something where maybe taking some steps left or right will get those objects out of your view? So take some time, do some high ISO tests just to bring your foreground into focus. You know, is there anything you need to adjust in how you're setting your camera up or where you're setting it? Our next step is exposure. In Milky Way photography, we want to get as much signal or light as possible. And we're going to do this through our aperture and our exposure time, our shutter speed. The ISO doesn't help with that in that sense. It just amplifies what comes in through changing our shutter speed and our aperture. So we want a shutter speed that our stars are going to be sharp, or do you want them to trail? That's something to consider as well. Having your aperture wide open. If you have a decent lens, you could probably leave it wide open, but most lenses have some aberration issues, so you may need to stop down your lens a little bit, so you're cutting out a little bit of light that way too, but that could be a sacrifice just because your stars are therefore sharper. So most astronomers, Milky Way photographers, kind of want a lens up on the top row as far as aperture goes. You want what's called a fast lens, and if you have a very fast lens, you can always stop that down and you still get quite a bit of light. You kind of want to be in the 2.8 range at the very least. So the only problem like that I mentioned is having that lens wide open, you do have those aberrations as an issue. So kind of consider stopping the lens down if you need to, so you're not sacrificing sharpness of your stars. For your foreground image, you want some depth of field, so you're going to want to stop that lens down a little bit, but your foreground's going to be dark, so you're going to need to have that lens open for a longer period of time. So if you have that ability without to have people drive by and ruin your nighttime foreground, then that's another option that you can go and have some depth of field in your image. With that shutter speed, we're always trying to counteract Earth's rotation. So you need to know, do you want to freeze that motion or keep it keep it so that you get some star trails like this. In Milky Way photography, I will often have one camera doing star trails while the other one I'm focusing on my Milky Way photography. So you have to think, I need to have a shutter speed that's going to be fast enough to keep my stars in focus so that they don't move. So a general rule of thumb, it's not perfect by any means, but you can use the 500 rule to figure out what your shutter speed is going to be. That's simply 500 divided by the focal length of your lens times your crop factor. So if you're on a full frame, your crop factor is going to be 1. If you're on a crop sensor camera such as like a Nikon D7500, Nikon's crop sensors are at 1.5. Canon is at 1.6. If you're using a micro four thirds, your crop factor is going to be 2. So my Milky Way picture that I took there at the Grand Canyon Star Party back in 2019, this is the lens I was using on my camera. I had it at 18 millimeters. So 18 millimeters times 1.5, divide that into 500, and it gave me 18 seconds. Well, I know from working with my gear, I will get trailing stars at that shutter speed. So for me, playing with it after seeing what a ballpark figure is, 13 seconds works for me. So you need to play with your gear as well. There are apps and things you can use to help you with finding
Cheryl?
out. Yes.
I'm sorry. I was waiting for you to take a breath.
Sure. Sorry. A lot of info.
There's a discussion here, and I know I've encountered it too. Once you set your focus, it's really easy to touch a lens. So do you ever lock down your lens, and if so, how do you do it?
Well, I know some people have used gaffer's tape to do that because it won't leave a sticky residue when you remove it. I've tried that. I have done, I forget what it's called, but it's like a large rubber band type thing, a lens band that you can kind of put diagonally across on your lens to kind of help keep the focus stay. Me personally, I just really try to be cognizant. Don't touch your lens once you have it set. And I do check my focus often. So there's a couple of techniques you can use using a lens rubber band type of thing. I've found it on Amazon for a few dollars, or getting gaffer's tape, which is very helpful for various things when you're out in the field, helping, your tripod's broken, having some gaffer's tape wrapped around a credit card or an old gift card or something is very helpful.
Alex, did you have a question?
Excuse me, Eric. Gaffer's tape is not hard to find. You can find it at the Home Depot or Amazon, any place. But the blue tape works pretty good too.
Yeah.
Blue tape is the painter's tape, and the key to painter's tape is that it puts it on, removes it without leaving any residue. But the number one rule is, I've typed it up in the chat, is don't touch the thing. Just after you focus, just train yourself not to touch it.
Yep.
Now, that thing that Cheryl was talking about that's like a rubber band, and she couldn't think of the name, a rubber band will help. So just call it a rubber band, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And mechanically, your focuser can be repaired. It's not supposed to move by itself. Okay, so it may have gotten loose through the years. There's ways to focus it, but they're very technical. So sorry about that. It's time to go out. I think that's the only issue that come up so far.
That's the only question. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, so I highly recommend having gaffer's tape because it's even stickier than the blue painter's tape. But again, like the blue painter's tape, it won't pull and leave residue behind, and it comes in a bunch of colors too. So like I was mentioning, you can use apps to help you with finding out what your shutter speed kind of ballpark should be. So if you happen to own photo pills, you go into the Spot Stars pill, and you can I just use the default. If you're going to do work where you want it large and printed on your wall, then you probably want to go with the accurate setting. But for a D7500, for example, it's recommending, if I'm using that lens at 18 millimeters, the widest open it goes is 3.5, then I'm looking at about 13 seconds. And that actually, in the field, that's worked very well for that particular lens with the camera that I use on it. So this is what's called the NPF rule, which is a lot more technical, more mathematical to figure out than the 500 rule, where that 500 rule was saying use 18 seconds. I know I'll get star blur there. So that little help there in photo pills, if you happen to have the app, it's called Spot Stars, can be helpful to kind of help you find what's that base exposure. The other thing is get out in the field, take a lot of photos and see what works for your gear. Once you figure out how fast you need to shoot and you have your lens at the aperture that's leaving you with nice sharp pinpoint stars, then you want to adjust your ISO. So that's our last setting that we use. Now, daytime, you're going to want to have your lens using your camera using ISO like 100, 400, or 800, but we Milky Way photographers, we're probably going to be operating more like 3200 to 6400. So using that higher ISO is going to increase the sensitivity of our camera sensor, and it's going to result in a brighter image. But the downside is that's bringing noise in your image that I mentioned as well. So when I shoot, I am stacking images. I will take probably 12 to 15, one right after another, and then save those images to stack later. And I've got a little bit more on that in a bit. So here I was testing out a friend's lens actually on one of my cameras. So I was just racking it through the ISOs just to see how it looked. And here's just raw, didn't process it other than took the raw file and converted it to a JPEG. Too bright at ISO 6400. I should have done one at 32. I don't know why I did one at 2500, but that's getting a little bit better. Probably 3200 would have been the money shot, as they say. But you're going to control the brightness of your image with the ISO. Don't mess with your aperture once you've got that tied in. Don't mess with your shutter speed. Just change your ISO at this point. The other thing you want to do is look at your histogram if you have that as a function in your camera, because I'll tell you right now, your LCD screen lies. You're in the dark. You've hopefully at least dimmed it down so it's not super bright, but it is a light source. And you're looking at this thing where your eyes are more dark adapted, so everything's going to look brighter than it actually is. So instead, let your histogram let you know where your luminance values in your image really are. So in night photography, you don't want to clip your blacks just like when you're doing regular imaging. You don't want to overexpose it either. For my gear and my personal taste in photography, for nighttime photography, I like it being somewhere in this area here, about a fourth to a third, getting towards a halfway over for my sky data. Now, you might have some data over here in the blacks because maybe you're in a very dark location, like a Bortle 1 sky, and your foreground is dark. So you'll have then a peak for dark for your foreground. If you're doing a blend and you're going to take a foreground shot later with long exposure, don't worry about having blacks over here. Look at your sky data, and you want it, again, off that left edge and not over at the right either. So a couple of examples out in Joshua Tree in a couple of different spots. That's my go-to area when I'm shooting because it's about an hour and 3/4 away for me. So again, I like exposing about a third-ish over to the left, a quarter to a third over. And again, it's your art, so you edit your photo the way you like it to be. Well, our fourth step is light. If you want to have access to your foreground with light pollution causing an issue, maybe you want to light it artificially instead. You want to use something like a flashlight or some sort of lantern, especially if you have like, they're like charcoal kilns that are outside of Ely, I believe, in Nevada. It's one of my places I'd love to go see, photograph. I've seen people put lanterns and have that beautiful amber light. So that's something, artificial light you could use to light your scene, or an LCD panel. You can change the brightness on these, the color of the light. Often they have diffusers that you can use as well. But you do need to remember any light that you're adding does have quantity, quality, and direction to it. We can also use our natural light like starlight and moonlight as well. So as far as quantity goes, just remember if you're using some sort of light source to light your scene, anything very close to your camera is going to be very bright, and that fall off of light is very quick. The farther you go out, it's going to drop off very fast. So you want to kind of consider where you're placing your light source. That's going to be a critical thing. You don't want to have it too bright, but you also don't want to have it too dim that it's not really helping at all if you decide to use an LCD panel, which I prefer not to. Light can be kind of hard and leave shadows. Do you have a question?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
You notice I probably clicked my button.
Yeah.
A question came up. I guess everyone is using DSLRs or mirrorless. Can you use a dedicated Astro camera for this?
You know, you probably could. I haven't tried because I'm embedded in the ZWO architecture, so I have the ASI 533MC Pro. that I image with. I've actually seen, I think once somebody did share a picture that they took with the dedicated, cooled camera. It'd be interesting to try it. It's just, I happen to, after getting into this hobby, upgraded my cameras to something that's got a lower light level tolerance on my sensor. So that's what I end up using.
What about, you recommend modded cameras?
I do. It's funny, when I first started this out, I didn't like that dreaded hydrogen alpha in my Milky Way. Oh, no, it has to be pure and normal and everything. So I bought my camera once I decided to get something, a mirrorless, as I was using a crop sensor at the time. So I wanted to get a full frame mirrorless, and I did not want to get it modded. No. So I shot with it for 6 to 9 months with it just stock. And then I started looking at people's pictures. I'm like, I'm looking at Dan Zafra's work, and I'm looking at Richard Toddy's work from Australia, and a lot of these other kind of famous Milky Way photographers, and they're using Astro modded cameras. And so it really started taking on the effect of, yeah, I kind of do like that in my images. So I did send mine out and had it Astro modded. Although I have friends that do not have theirs Astro modded, and they do beautiful work with their camera, just stock as it is too. So kind of to your taste.
That's a question then. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so when you're using your light sources, pretty much everything is going to create a hard light source where it's going to give you very focused, direct, sharp shadows. You can use on a light panel a diffuser that might help a little bit with that, or if you have a frosted casing on a lantern, if you're going to try using a lantern to illuminate someplace in your foreground, that could help. I typically do starlit foregrounds, so even though starlight technically is hard light, it's omnidirectional, can't talk tonight, I guess. So it's going to fill in all those shadows. So for me, that works fine. But if you're going to use a flashlight, really beware of how hard that light can be, such as in, whoops, I went one too many, in these images. In this one here, we're out at these some of the statues that are out in the Anza-Borrego Desert. My husband is literally holding the flashlight over my head, and you can just see how awful that lighting is. So you don't want to front light your object if you're going to light it artificially. You want to do this off at an angle. So use a side light. Kind of think of being off at 45 degrees and then deciding how far back from your subject do you need to be to light it the way you want, and take a lot of test shots to see if it's getting you the quality that you want. Sometimes backlighting can be helpful. Like here, I was out at Yellowstone National Park, and I definitely wanted to get Old Faithful with the Milky Way back in September a year ago. And you have the Old Faithful Lodge here doing a wonderful job of lighting up. Now you have this other lodge here doing an awesome job of distracting as well, but sometimes a backlight can be interesting in your image too. So if you're adding light to your scene, kind of be cognizant of how it's going to affect your image. Another thing you can use is blue hour, and probably everybody here knows blue hour is basically after sunset has happened, the sun has dipped down below the horizon about 6 degrees. Well, and during that time period, you still have some of that golden, lovely light that evening photographers like to use. Well, for Milky Way photographers, we like sometimes to use blue hour, which is when you get a transition from that lovely gold in the night sky as it's starting to get dark out to more of a bluish hue. So that's what we call blue hour. And so it's that time where the sun is dipped below the horizon between 6 to 8 degrees. Now, blue hour sounds like, hey, I have an hour to get my foreground images so they have some nice color to them and some shadows and dimension. It really only lasts 10 to 15 minutes, so you have to be kind of ready for the situation once blue hour does hit. Oops, one too many. Sorry about that. So again, I don't do a lot of blue hour shots because you have to take your foreground and you have to wait and wait and wait and wait sometimes for it to get dark. But I did do this one back in August. So I took 2 sky frames. So this was going to be a vertical panorama known as a vertorama. I did do a foreground that was during blue hour. And then I took that pano that I stitched together, combined it with this image. I masked off the sky portion, blended the two in Photoshop to create a blue hour blend. And a lot of photographers do that. This is probably something I need to work on. I just get impatient. I want to get out there and shoot. I don't want to have to wait. Some other things you want to think about when you're out shooting, again, is turning that image stabilization off. You're on a tripod, so your camera, unless you bump it, isn't going to move. So turning off that image stabilization or vibration reduction will be helpful. You want to shoot in RAW. RAW is going to give you a lot of more latitude to deal with in your file, because remember, a JPEG is a compressed file and you're losing data if you shoot in JPEG. Now, my shot that I took there at the Grand Canyon, yeah, I was a rookie. I didn't know better. Nobody told me to shoot in RAW. I always was shooting in JPEG, so that's what that image is. I can add a little bit of depth to it when I'm trying to post-process it, but it wouldn't be like it would have been if I had shot that in RAW. So know how to set your image quality on your camera to RAW. White balance is something you might want to look at as well. Technically, auto white balance, you can set your camera to that and adjust it to your taste in post-processing. A lot of people don't want to have to do that, and as photographers, they want to put their white balance to a setting that they like. With me using an Astro modded camera, my scenes are going to be more on that purplish magenta hue. So I try to set a white balance setting that's going to get rid of a little bit of that, so I don't have to work quite so hard to fix my sky when I'm in post-production. If you don't have that ability to change your white balance, but if you have presets, well, play around, see what you get. Daylight is going to give kind of a warm tone to your sky. Tungsten will make it a little bit more blue. And fluorescence is going to give you a little tint of magenta because it is there to kind of counteract that green tint with fluorescent lights. So if you don't have white balance control, try using a preset if your camera has that. See how it comes out. You also want to turn off high ISO noise reduction. Since we are shooting in RAW, that's really a feature that your camera uses for shooting in JPEG mode. And the other thing you want to do for sure is turn off your long exposure noise reduction, because that's basically like every shot you take, then your camera takes a dark frame, does its magic, subtracts the noise, and spits out your image. Well, that's going to take twice as long for you. So if you're doing your 10-second exposures for the sky, or maybe you're doing for your camera 25 seconds works for your sky images, you need to wait another 25 seconds to get that image come across your LCD screen and get saved on your memory. So I turn this off. Very often, if I remember, I'll take a dark frame at the end of the night at the same general temperature I was shooting at, just put the lens cap on, and I'll use all the settings that I use during the night, and I'll take a dark frame at each of these settings if I find that I need to do that. Better yet, I just stack my images. Shooting wide angle is very forgiving as far as if you have little bits and things on dust on your sensor or on your lens. But taking a dark frame could be helpful. So I have done it a few times, but most of the time I'll just stack my images. That helps get rid of some impurities in my image and to reduce that noise. So some common issues with noise, again, stack them. There is a feature in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom that allows you to denoise your image, but it has to be a single image. If you've gone out and done a panorama and then taken that into Lightroom to do some editing, it won't allow you to denoise your image. It is only for single images, so keep that in mind. There is software you can purchase. Topaz Labs is kind of renowned for their photography tools. They have one called Denoise AI, which actually is unfortunately not a standalone from what I understand anymore. It's embedded in their photo AI product now, but it's a little expensive, so wait till they're having a sale. I do use this from time to time when I notice I still have some noise in my image. So putting it all together, you learn how to use your gear in the dark. You learn how to focus on the stars, not worrying about your foreground when you first get started. You just want to get those perfect star focus. Then you compose your shot, get your tripod level, use that artificial horizon function on your camera, so you're not like have your camera tilted up, but you're kind of cockeyed off with one side. Frame your image, and then how is it going to look? Do you want to shoot this in portrait mode, or you want to do it in landscape? So that's where that lens, the bracket, L bracket comes in handy. Use your camera settings, properly expose the sky, and remember, once you have your shutter speed figured out and your aperture, so you have nice sharp stars, then just change your ISO, take a bunch of photos, change your ISO, take a bunch of photos, and then you've got lots to play around with when you go back home. Lighting, do you want to leave your scene unlit? Do you want to let the stars light it? Do you have a little bit of moon coming up or going down at the beginning of your shoot that you want to illuminate your foreground? Those are some options, or bring something to light your foreground. But I recommend having it off at a 45-degree angle and make sure it's not too hot of a light source that is too hard on your foreground. And then shoot in RAW. Turn your LCD screen down and be sure to look at your histogram when you get those images on the back of your camera screen. There are some advanced techniques you can do. I did mention that I do have my mirrorless is Astro modded. My crop sensor camera is not. You can do a visible plus H alpha mod, which is what I did through Spencer's camera. You could do a full spectrum mod. But there's a nice description on their website, so I'll let you go, you can read through if you're thinking of having that done with your camera. You can add HA data using drop-in filters. Canon people are lucky on this one. It's a nice option for you. Using a Nikon Z, that's an issue for me, but I did find something that works. There is a filter, drop-in filter that works for the Z mount. And you can use something like this, the IDAS NBZ Nebula Booster Filter. My problem is I already own a bunch of 2-inch filters because I also Astro image. I don't want to buy another filter and spend another $350 just for my Milky Way photography. I want to use my IDAS NBZ filter that I have that's a 2-inch. So I actually found a distributor who makes this drop-in filter drawer for the Nikon Z camera. You need to use an F-mount lens to go with it. And I've just started using this. I got it late in the season, so I didn't get Milky Way, but I can't wait till the Milky Way course season coming around the corner here before we know it. This is a 48 millimeter ring that your pre-existing screw-in filter, 2-inch, is going to go into. I have several of the filter drawers here, and when I go out at night, I will put a UV IR cut filter in there, and I'll put my Nebula Booster, or I've also used, I have a Optolong L Enhance, and actually my husband got me the L Extreme for Christmas, so I'm looking forward to using that as well. So using this system, there's some drawbacks, but you can make it work for you. We did get out before the holiday season got underway, and I was out taking Orion over here over some mountains in Joshua Tree National Park. So this is a tracked image using my Skywatcher star tracker. Lowered the ISO a bit, which allows you to do that when you're tracking. I stopped my lens. Actually, yeah, I did stop my lens down because that's an f1.4. It's a fast Sigma lens on this one. So I stopped it down a bit, and I was using the UV IR cut filter on that. And then I swapped out the filter holder. It had the IDAS filter in there. And then I took a longer exposure at a faster ISO, moved that up to 6400. I probably should have gone a little longer. So I know next time, probably 115, 120 seconds would have been a little bit better. But then I have my HA frame, Well, I followed a guy that actually uses a star glow filter with his HA work. So I bought an inexpensive filter to go on the front of my camera. If you are a landscape photographer and you have the drop-in filter and you can use one of these square or rectangular filters, there are those to be had as well. So with a star glow filter, here's my regular tracked shot zoomed in, but look how beautiful the stars of Orion really pop. So putting it all together, and I will tell you, it is a work in progress. I don't like how my HA is looking, but then Christmas happened and I had guests coming for a couple of weeks, so I haven't been able to go back and mess with this image. But look at all the glorious HA that you can get with your mirrorless camera. I think that's amazing. So that's my next step up in my Milky Way game, is to capture more HA using that. So if you're okay with me taking a moment just to kind of show you some editing examples, I took some screenshots of some things that I did a quick edit on. So we think we're okay with doing that?
Yeah, I think you're fine.
And remember, it takes us a few seconds to get back to the microphone button.
No worries.
Yeah, we're doing fine.
Okay.
You can get it done. Go.
Okay. Yeah, this part happens pretty simple, but I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of, I use Lightroom and Photoshop when I'm doing my Milky Way photography editing. You can use GIMP. That's what my husband tends to use when he's editing stuff. Although Milky Way photography is something he wanted for me to have as my genre, where he's more of a observer when it comes to telescope use. So let me show you a couple of things. This is an image I took at Convict Lake, July of 2023. This is my raw file, just a screenshot of it. And you can see my foreground's pretty dark. I'm not worried about that so much because I actually did do a long exposure foreground. I'm worried about my sky data. And yeah, it's more over a fourth or so of the way to the right. That's where I like my sky. So that's kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at your LCD in the histogram on the back of your LCD. So I'm going to go in and do a lens correction. I want to remove chromatic aberration. I want to enable my lens profile characteristics. If I'm going to put this in a panorama, I would take my distortion down to 0. And I would also remove the vignetting, because you tend to get a bit at the corners in your images. And if you're going to be putting these all together in a panorama, it can make it easier to stitch together if you mess with your vignetting a little bit there under the lens correction tab in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. Same engine, just looks a little different. Then I'm going to do a white balance correction, and there's a couple of ways that we can do this, but I had a couple of people that I follow showed me this, and for my purposes with my Astro modded camera, I like the results better. I go over to my white balance tab over here in Lightroom, and I grab my eyedropper. I go up into a corner where I don't see a star, and then I move left or right because it gives you this little frame. I pick a darker area and click, and voila, there is my white balance correction. Now, another thing you can do is not use that, and you take your vibrance and your saturation values on the sliders here and put them at 100%, and then you use your temperature and tint sliders to look at your sky, and you want kind of a mix of, you see some blues, some yellows, some greens, and some magentas, and when you're kind of happy with you're seeing a bit of each of those, then you just put your vibrance and saturation back to 0, and you should have a color balanced, white balanced image. For my camera, I just find it works better using the little eyedropper function and hitting in the corner there. Well, next thing I'm going to use is the sliders for exposure and highlights and shadow and whites and contrast. So doing that, notice I added from this image to this image. Notice how I brought out a little detail in my foreground. My sensor on my camera is pretty sensitive, so it does pick out some detail even under those low light situations. And there's my single edit. So I've got a little bit of detail in my foreground and a sky that I'm real happy with. Well, that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is you can step it up a notch by doing what's called a double edit of a single frame. So in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, look for your little masking icon here. And they added about 2 years ago a little feature called Select Sky. So you click that button, let it do its thing, and you'll see an overlay that will show up on your sky showing that your sky is what's selected, and you can do a local edit to that region of your image without disturbing your foreground. Now you can see it's peeking into my foreground a little bit. You can actually go up and drop this menu down just a little bit and hit subtract and use a brush tool and get rid of some of that. For this purposes, I just wanted to show you what's available. So I didn't do that for this one. And so here I'm editing my sky further. So I moved my sliders around. I moved my highlights down. I increased my shadows. I played around with my blacks. You can play with your whites as well. And once I get those the way I like them, if I want a little more contrast, then I might use the contrast slider here. Or I might decide, you know, I want my sky just a little lighter than that, and then I'll add just a little exposure as well. So once you get the sky the way you want, then so that's, oh, that's right, I forgot. I also added, I wanted this really moody, so I added curves to that as well. Then I thought, okay, it's a little bit dark, so I increased my exposure value by about 1/3 of a stop. And now I'm ready to do my foreground. So if you right-click on that mask that you created when you select the sky, and you pick the function that says duplicate and invert your mask, it'll do this. So now your foreground is selected, and you do the same thing. You edit your foreground, messing around with the sliders to your taste, because it's an art. And there I edited that. So I kind of like that. So that was my final image. And then I'm looking at my water and seeing, wow, I'm seeing a lot of grain in there. So I decided to take it back into the Lightroom, and I used the noise reduction. And you notice from there to there, it really took out a lot of the noise that I still had in my single image. Now, one issue, if you push it too far, notice you're getting some haloing along the horizon. So you want to kind of watch how far you go with your editing, but you can do a double edit using Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. And I just wanted to quickly show a vertical panorama that you can do as well in Lightroom and then pull it into Photoshop. So this is just a screenshot of the 2 rows that I did of the sky out at Mormon Row out in Wyoming, just north of Jackson, on our way home from Yellowstone. And then I did take 3 long exposure foregrounds for the T.A. Moulton Homestead barn there. And then I went into Lightroom and I did my basic edits. I fixed my color on my white balance. I did a little bit of editing for my sky, just a little bit on my sliders. And then I exported those files as TIFFs. And then I took all the sky frames, and I would use an app called, a program on Windows called Sequitur. If you're running Mac, you want to use, it's called Starry Landscape Stacker. Starry Landscape Stacker. Oh my goodness, that's a mouthful, isn't it? There's a fee for that one. Sequitur is free. So I took all those 15, I think it was, or 12 frames, and I got one TIFF, another TIFF for this part of the sky, and then I put them together in PT GUI as one vertical frame. Did we have a question?
No, Alex's mic is just on.
Oh, okay. All right. And I'm just about done here. So on my foreground, I did align all 3 images, and I just didn't like the way it was looking. So I did use one of the 3 foregrounds, and I took that into Lightroom and then into Photoshop. So I took some of those highlights down, made it a little more shadowy, got the colors the way I wanted. Still have a little bit of issue I needed to work on over here on this tree line, but I ended up taking care of that. And I masked out the sky portion because I don't want the sky from here. This was just a single exposure, I forget how long, couple minutes long, and I did not have my tracker with me, so I didn't have to worry about in my sky shot of anything moving. So on my screen here on Photoshop, it's going to look like this, but this is the layer actual, what you're seeing. So my sky is transparent, and here's my sky frame. So this was the cropped panorama, and then I did a little more detail on this sky. I didn't do a lot to this one. And then I brought them both into Photoshop. So I had 12 images for each for the sky, 2 rows. It was a 3-minute long exposure for the foreground. I took those images into Lightroom, edited them all, and actually it should be 25 images, not 15, but anyway. Did the lens correction, the white balance correction, those basic edits of the sliders, exported it as TIFFs. I stacked it with Sequitur. I stitched the sky with PT GUI. You can do that in Photoshop. You can do that in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw as well. I opened the stitched sky in Photoshop. I edited that, and then I opened the foreground in Photoshop. I used the magic wand tool to get rid of the sky in my foreground shot, editing that a few times. And so I got rid of that little bit that we had earlier. I went in and cleaned up my mask here, and that's my final image for that. So with that, I hope you found something useful. And if anybody has any more questions, I'd be happy to entertain those.
How did you clean up the mask? Because I've been really struggling with that.
Oh, yeah. So what I end up doing, and let me go back. Okay, so in this image, in Photoshop, I use the magic wand tool, and I just clicked around for it to select. I selected very close to any stars that were going into my horizon or into the barn roof. I selected those so they would be part of the selection, and then I used the polygonal lasso tool, and literally you click outside your image, click, and close the loop, and it captures any stars or anything that you missed masking out. Then you create that as a mask and invert it. So now I'm showing my foreground, but not showing the sky. And then what I ended up doing is I clicked on the mask in Photoshop of my foreground, and on the mask I did the select and mask feature, and there's a I forget exactly what it's called, this like edge refinement tool. It's on the left edge if you go into that aspect of Photoshop, and I literally did a very light move of the mouse across my foreground, and then there's a slider to increase the contrast, so you just have black and white, and that cleaned up the edge with these trees. If I needed to, I could also go into the mask. You Alt and click on the mask so you can see it in Photoshop, and you can use the magic wand tool, and it's so tedious, but zoom way in on your image, make sure it's set to add. You have your mask selected, and you just click in between every stupid little tree and getting your mask perfected. So for here, it wasn't so bad because my trees are far away, but when they're close up, yeah, I hate trees.
Yeah, especially when the tree is going into the sky and you can see through the branches of the tree.
Yes.
I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's almost not worth the time.
Yes.
I've had some trees just suddenly disappear in my image.
Yes, I got it.
They don't have to be there.
Yeah, I got it. I
was using the sky replacement tool to make a mask and just couldn't figure out how to get it to not have such a sharp edge because feathering it made it not work. And then it was a struggle.
Yeah. Well,
Cheryl has a clean image here with a distant horizon, but if it's up close, it can just be.
Well, this was just like the top of a mountain. It was like not even trees. There was like a line along it. I just couldn't fix it.
Right.
There are parameters you can set the magic wand to make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, you can definitely sculpt your image. I was going to show you one, if I can go back to it real quick and find it was this one and share that one. Share. Okay, and hopefully. All right, so this image, actually, this is one of my absolute favorites that I've done. But if I zoom in here, well, it's moving it over. Sorry, I should have done this, but that's okay. I'll fix it later. This Joshua tree, you know, my sky's behind it. And so I'm having to deal with, okay, click, 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 click. I have a tablet that I'll use for that level of detail. I spent hours just on this stupid tree. So it can be tedious, but I enjoy doing that. My husband, he doesn't have the patience for such a thing. But for me, I can sit here for hours and do mine, you know?
Okay.
So.
Cheryl?
Yeah.
We did have a question. Hang on for a second. Let me get back up to it. We did have a question from EH that asked us, have you ever tried editing landscape Astro in PixInsight? Are you familiar with PixInsight?
Okay, so I have been an Astro imager for about the last 3 years. I have 2 telescopes that I image through, but I only have the one dedicated camera. So I've messed around with Photoshop at first because that's what I knew. And then I started messing around with Serial. And I did go 2 years ago to, at Nightfall, the conference that Alex has been very integral part of for a long, long time out in Southern California in Borrego Springs. I did go to Ron Brescher's PixInsight workshop. I didn't own the program at the time. I do now. I'm just learning, but I have seen a couple of my fellow landscape or Milky Way photographers do actually use PixInsight for their editing. I have gone actually in Photoshop. I have all the RC Astro tools, and I've done star removal on my sky images, and just to tweak the Milky Way, and then put the stars back. In fact, if I can share just one more time the slide that I have up right now. This one with Penguin Rock, I actually did a star reduction on this one because I really wanted to make the Milky Way the star here. And we're looking down towards Palm Springs, a lot of light pollution. But I did do a star reduction on this one, and because on this one I did remove the stars, and I tried to get more detail out of that Milky Way because there's so much light pollution that I'm shooting into, and it helped me get an image that I was relatively happy with. So I've messed around a little bit with it. I'm not comfortable in PixInsight yet. So now that the holidays are over and I don't have anything to do presentation-wise for a while, yeah, I'm going to get working on learning how to use PixInsight.
I think it's fair to say, though, that Photoshop and like tools are really the tools, and PixInsight is really for other functions, even though something like RC Astro has a couple star tools that might be useful.
Yeah.
And I think we all knew that Eric was going to say something to that effect.
Well, I think Star Exterminator is available for Photoshop as a plugin, if I recall.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, there's no question about it. The PixInsight people made it clear that they were not Photoshop, that you weren't supposed to be painting images with it, you weren't supposed to be fixing images with it, you were just supposed to process and things like that. So.
And you can.
Cheryl, have you ever used some of the AI tools in Photoshop that are now available?
I don't, other than I was just playing around with where you could, generate things in your image. And so I had one that had a Lake Hemet image. And so I wanted to say, well, what would it look like if I threw a boat in there? And so I was playing with that. But as far as the AI stuff, I use the AI from Topaz Labs pretty much for my noise reduction. That's really all I tend to use. I'm pretty basic on my Photoshop. That is my weakness. I think photography wise, I get the images that I need. I'm better at, thinking with the end in mind. How am I going to edit it? What images do I need to get? Because I've had a couple times where I didn't get enough sky, and then here's my foreground, and I'm like, oh crud, I have a hole here I don't have data for. So now I shoot very wide for my images, make sure I get enough sky, get enough of the foreground, I'm happy with the exposure, and then meld the two together that way through Photoshop.
Okay, you guys, if you have any more questions, please put them in comments. I want to tell you a little story. Cheryl and I are both part of the Riverside Astronomical Society. And as you know, we're in Riverside. Riverside is about 60, 70 miles east of the Pacific Ocean. And at the Pacific Ocean is where all those houses burned down over the last week. And we were going to a regularly scheduled Riverside Astronomical Society meeting last night. And every month we, of course, have presenters, and they come in. Last night's was coming in from Altadena, which, as you know, had one of the big fires. And he was unable to make it. I think his house is okay and stuff, but come on, that's pretty stressful. So a call immediately went out from our president who said, hey, who can do this? Who could, just step in and take a show. And, you're standing up in front of 30, 50 people plus another 30 over on Zoom, and you're supposed to give a presentation. I'm always ready to give that presentation, and so is Bob Stevens, another one of us, but he was in England right now. So I remembered that Cheryl was going to give this show, and I said, hey, let's ask Cheryl to do it because who wants to see Alex again? And Rick, the president, says, yeah, let's go. And so Cheryl stepped in last night, and I saw this whole show last night. And I want to tell you a little something I learned about the show. You know, when people have a lot of text in their slides, often the people sit there and they read their text. Yeah. Cheryl did not do that.
Yeah, to me, I did. But partially just because I wasn't sure if I'd have presenter view available, because it'd been a long time since I'd done a Google Meet. Because at the club, when I'm giving my chief observers report and I'm using our president's computer because he preloads my chief observer's PowerPoint in, I don't have presenter mode. So I wanted to make sure I had enough text to make myself remember to share all these things. But normally when I do a PowerPoint, I have way far less text on the screen. So apologize for having quite so much if you were reading a lot instead of just listening.
Yeah, but that wasn't my point. And by the way, Rick has fixed that. I checked it out last night. He can now do a presenter's view.
Oh, good.
So at any rate, Cheryl was not reading the slides. Okay, there's a whole lot more in those slides. In order to get everything you can get out of this presentation, you're going to have to look at it again and go through it a little slowly, checking out what all those, like what we have 12 apps on the one slide. Go look at what those apps were. Cheryl simply didn't have time to put them in there.
Right.
She didn't have time to, the tyranny of time. Anyway, there's a lot more to that, but with all the limitations of time, you did get a lot of commendations from people as we were going along, and you'll be getting a lot more, I'm sure. Thank you very much for being here tonight with us. Is there anything coming in? Pardon?
My pleasure.
Oh, and was there anything else coming in on comments?
I did. There were some comments, but no questions. I saw.
Oh, okay.
I think we're good.
Cool.
All right.
We are done. Okay, we're checking out. We'll have Alan here next week to tell us all about solar imaging that he is so good at. So come on back, and don't forget, we need you to volunteer to do like Cheryl has done and share your knowledge. Tell us about your latest astronomical imaging hobby, the latest project you're into. Just contact us and tell us. Good night, everybody. Good night, Terry. And who's working tonight? Molly, you're working tonight?
Good night.
You're
Terry,
streaming or
Terry.
Jaime?